Archie.
Dominic Frisby, welcome, and thank you for taking the time to come and speak to us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for thinking of me.
Have you been in Prague before?
I have been in Prague before. I came to a Students for Liberty conference here a few years ago and spoke at that. And I love Prague. It's a beautiful, beautiful city.
What do you love about it?
Well, I don't know if this is true, but this is what I was told, is that when the Germans invaded at World War II, most other countries that they invaded, they destroyed wherever they went. But the Germans were under strict instructions, because Hitler had studied in Prague and loved it, not to destroy any of the buildings. So its historical centre is old and beautiful, and many European cities have been rebuilt after World War II, but this one is, its oldness is still there, and that's what gives it beauty.
I'd also heard that I didn't know that Hitler had supposedly studied here.
There's bound to be somebody who just completely...
I thought they were so enamored by the beauty that they couldn't bring themselves to destroy it. But
no,
given
they
what
were
they
Nazis,
did,
they did that what
they did everywhere else, I doubt that was...
There were plenty
it's
of
too
other
beautiful.
beautiful cities, but Hitler apparently had a very soft spot. That is what I was told, and I'm sure some viewer will just debunk that straight away. But
it was the first European holiday I took after moving to London from Melbourne. And I was just totally enchanted by the beauty of the city. It was everything that I wanted a European city to be.
Yeah.
And I came here, and every corner, just like I turned a corner and something beautiful just blew me away.
Yeah. And I think you find this throughout Eastern Europe, which you don't find in Western European anymore, is the city and the country has preserved its identity. It hasn't been, there's loads and loads of travellers coming through, but it hasn't been kind of diluted away in the way that other Western European cities have. And so there's a sort of, I'm sure that will happen eventually, but for the moment, it's still, you feel like you're talking to Czech people and you're in the Czech Republic.
I think that's very much a reality. And more credit to them, because they're such wonderfully open and welcoming and really polite people, really lovely. Like nice is a perfect word to describe any interaction with a Czech person here. But all the more so given how much tourism absolutely dominates the center of Prague during the warmer months. You go through the old town anywhere from late spring to early autumn, the warmer months, and it's just dominated by tourism. Mm-hmm. And when I first came to Prague, there was kind of like a seedy underbelly because of all of the cheap European airlines that had sort of really taken off. We're talking 2006, around that time. And so, all the stag do's, they were dominating the nightlife here. And I think it developed a very seedy underbelly, crime, prostitution, drugs, all that sort of stuff. It seems to have cleaned up enormously.
Okay, because I was going to say, I'm not staying in the town centre, but I was walking through the town centre last night, and it feels clean, and it feels safe, and it still feels like a high trust place.
Yeah.
I'm staying in the suburbs because I couldn't get a room in the hotel that everyone else is staying in at the conference, and it just feels so. Like, I wouldn't worry about leaving my phone out or something like that. In fact, I left my bag in a restaurant last night with my laptop in it, my passport in it. And, that was a bad bag to lose. And I was able to go back 90 minutes later and, it was all still there. And
they've well and truly cleaned it up. Like those problems I listed just a moment ago, that was 2006. And that's no longer the case here. And it's exactly as you've described it. It's just really nice. You don't feel any hesitation or threat level, even walking alone at night through the old town?
I think litter is a really good indicator of the mental loyalty that people have to their culture and their city. And when I was growing up in London, you did not litter. We actually, I remember going out with one of our teachers one time, and he made us. If we saw somebody else's litter, we would pick it up. And now you go to London and everyone's just casually drops stuff. Oh, it's somebody else's problem. Somebody else will clean it up. And it's a real symbol of the falling away of the social contract. There's no responsibility, and Prague is clean.
Looking for a secure, trusted way to buy, sell, and hold Bitcoin?
Gemini has been leading the way since 2014. Founded by the Winklevoss twins to be a security-first, fully regulated Bitcoin platform. With Gemini, your Bitcoin is protected with enterprise-grade security, backed by insurance and Type 2 certifications for SOC 1 and SOC 2. Whether you're new to Bitcoin or a long-time hodler, Gemini gives you the tools to stack sats and build generational wealth your way. From simple one-tap buys to advanced charts and trading features, it's all here. Buy, sell, and hold securely. That's Gemini. Gemini. Bitcoin with confidence. Need cash without selling your Bitcoin? With DeBiFi, you borrow against your Bitcoin, non-custodial, multi-sig escrow, and you keep your keys. No banks, no selling. Just institutional grade liquidity with terms up to 2 years and APRs as low as 9%. All transactions are signed using private keys on your own device. Using a 3 of 4 multi-sig setup, 3 out of 4 keys must approve every transaction, giving you control, transparency, and peace of mind. Whether you're a hodler, miner, small business, or treasury team, DeBiFi gives you the cash you need now without giving up your Bitcoin upside or triggering a taxable event. Get liquidity, keep exposure, and stay secure. That's DeBiFi. DeBiFi, your Bitcoin, your money.
You are a Bitcoin OG, and I say that with some level of surprise in my voice that you could probably sense, because I did not know that about you. Even though I've heard your name in British culture, British media, I have a kind of sense that you were in comedy, a little bit of journalism, that sort of thing. But I didn't know until about 6 months ago that you have been into Bitcoin since you wrote a book in 2014.
Well, I actually wrote the book in 2013, but because of the lag times in publishing, it didn't come out to 2014. I've known about it for a long time, but I think I can't really claim OG status because, if you go back in my emails, the very first email that mentions Bitcoin, I received in December 2010. And Bitcoin was 22 cents. And it was this newsletter I subscribed to, and he regurgitated an article that had been in PC World. And that article has now got legendary status. It was the first article explaining what Bitcoin is. And it's amazing how little the descriptions of what Bitcoin is now have changed from when that article was written.
What did it say?
It was just describing this new peer-to-peer currency, and it was run on this thing called the blockchain, and it's controlled by a network of computers, and it's money in and of itself, and there's limited supply, and it's a bearer asset, and it could potentially become, the default money system of the internet, and all things we say today, but just slightly. Because language evolves over the time, and we've got better at explaining what Bitcoin is. But it was just saying all those things that we say today, and how big this thing could grow, and so on. And I remember I literally read it like you just casually read one of the newsletters you subscribe to in emails. And I was a massive gold bug at the time. And I'd worked on a film called Four Horsemen, which was a big internet sensation film all about the financial crisis. And in that film, there was some of the best explanations of fiat currency and the damage it does. And and in the film we argued for a gold standard then, because Bitcoin, even though it existed, it wasn't in the film. Max Kaiser was in the film. And I was one of the big anti-fiat people, if you like. And so I read about it then, and then people would send me Bitcoins. You've got to look at this thing. And so I actually built up quite a big collection of Bitcoins just from people sending me to them. And then when I crowdfunded that book, and I remember they had these physical Bitcoins, and I was bidding for them on it because I was like, no, I still didn't quite get it, because I was like, no, it needs to be a gold-backed Bitcoin if it's going to work. And of course, that's not possible. And then they had physical Bitcoins that they were selling. And I remember I put a stink bid, because most things you buy on eBay, you stick a stink bid and you get it. And it went for double what the actual Bitcoin price was trading at. And I was like, what? How can somebody pay, $30 for one of these things when Bitcoin's only at 15? So, there was all these stupid things that I had to get through, but the price was moving so quickly. And at the time, I just listened to years of gold bugs saying fiat currency is going to collapse, your purchasing power is being eroded, we're going to have to go back to gold, buy gold mining companies. And then in 2011, the gold price fell. And then all the gold mining companies fell. And then I would listen to Bitcoiners saying the same thing. And I was like, I've heard this before with gold. It doesn't work. It doesn't end well. And you know, I looked at Bitcoin as like another mining company. And it kept doubling. And I can't buy it after it's doubled. It went, you know, $1 to $2, $2 to $4. I can't buy it. It went all the way up to $32. And then it collapsed right back to $2. And at that point, I should have bought it. Didn't. And so I had a little collection because, as I say, people used to send them out, but I never, and you said you didn't know me. If I should have gone, I'm very lazy and if I can stay at my house and not go out, I won't. And I was getting divorced and I was working on this film. So I should have gone to Bitcoin conferences and, you know, indoctrinated myself. I think if you're going to invest in a bull market and be long, whether it's a stock or a commodity, whatever it is, you need to really believe in it. And in order to stop yourself getting shaken off, you need to keep reminding yourself why you believe in this thing. And that's why Bitcoin has like this near religious kind of, you know, when people, it's a bit like diets. When you're on a new diet, you have to believe in the diet in order to do the diet. And then you start telling everyone else about this diet and driving them mad. But it's part of the reinforcing the belief in your mind. And you have to do that with Bitcoin. You've got to believe in it. And I didn't believe in it enough. I hated fiat, but I didn't believe in Bitcoin enough. And I should have gone to more conferences. And that would have meant, you know, and then I'd be, you know, richer than the Winkle. I remember the Winklevoss brothers buying it at $100 and me thinking they were mugs for overpaying. But this is me having watched it go from $2 up to $100 without putting enough money in. And I had mates who bought like, you know, they bought 1,000 coins at $10, for example, 10 grand, 1,000 coins, you know, they're so rich now.
Wow.
And so I would say for all those reasons, I would say I was sort of an OG, but not an OG. And my book on it was almost written as a catch-up trade. I was like, I've missed the fucking thing. I'll write the book and I'll become the main guru about the whole thing. And then the book came out in that crypto winter when gold went from, when Bitcoin went from 1,200, same price as an ounce of gold, all the way back to 200. And so it didn't get released in America because they said, no, Bitcoin's not going to last. So it was well known in the UK, but not outside of the UK. But anyway, so for all those, I'm making excuses. The bottom line is I didn't embrace it with my own money and belief, even though I wrote a book about it, as much as I should have done. And so that's why I don't call myself a proper OG, and probably why you hadn't heard of me until recently. But you know, I remember there are people who bought it because of my book. I wrote the first article in Money Week about it in like 2013. And, you know, people bought it because of that article. And so there are loads of people who've made so much money who first heard about it from me. So I've been a great educator, but yeah, I love it. I think it's absolutely great. And I love what it's become.
I think we tend to get drawn, most people tend to get drawn into Bitcoin through the hype of a bull market.
Yeah.
And then the bear market washes out most of us. And the people who remain tend to become really quite hardened. Like if you make it through one bear market, chances are you're a Bitcoiner for life after that. It's just a question of how much and when you might cash out to sort of improve your lifestyle, but you're always going to be holding quite a large amount of your wealth in Bitcoin from that point onwards. That certainly happened to me. I got into it as a trade in late 2020, and then just become more and more sort of, as I consumed more and more of the content on the timeline and had a look at some of the potential valuations, use cases, business cases for the upside. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, well, I think it's survived for a couple of cycles, and this is the third cycle. It's certainly not going away. And I became more and more convinced that actually this is growing. This is a real thing from now on.
I think one of the most powerful lines in Bitcoin is you get Bitcoin at the price you deserve. And that certainly applies to me. And I got hacked in 2015. So I had all my coins stolen. And then we had that bull market, 2016, I think it went, was it $20,000? It went
16, 17, yeah, that's right, yeah.
And I'd gone from having to being there, not invested as much as I should have, but at least I had plenty of exposure, and to having nothing. And then I was like, so I've now got to buy all the coins that I had stolen from me. And so now I've got to risk all this capital, and then it could go to zero. So that stopped me. And it's my own fault. I had it was a common hack at the time. It was blockchain.info, and they would find your an archived wallet in your webmail. And there was this big Bitcoin dinner, and everyone who went to the Bitcoin dinner got hacked because we clicked on something. And there were some big cheeses at that dinner. I still wish I knew who did it. Well, I sort of, it was a guy in England because I found his IP address. Anyway, doesn't matter. But so then I had to go through a bull market, watching everyone else become gazillionaires and me missing out on a change of wealth, which wouldn't have just changed my own wealth. It would have changed the destiny of my entire family for generations to come. Do you know what I mean? I could have bought a huge castle and put it in the family name and blah, blah, blah. And so then that gave me massive depression for a period. And I think that depression has come to other people who've known about, like how many times you've had people come up and go, I knew about Bitcoin then, but I didn't invest and I should have, and now it's too late. No, it isn't. But people keep going through that journey, and I went through that journey. So I made my first significant investment much later than I should have done. And I've been through another bull market cycle and a bear market cycle, and now I don't care. And so I think you have to go, you talked about the bull market and the bear market cycle. You have to go through the getting over yourself cycle. It's not too late. You just have to go through all of this. This is all stuff you have to go through. It's a psychological journey. And for some people, it takes longer than others. But so there's profound truth to that you get Bitcoin at the price you deserve. And it's a belief system. It really is. And that's why I use the word religion cautiously, because you can sort of, it's a religion. It is, but religion is great. There are good religions and there are bad religions, but human beings need something to believe in. And, Bitcoin is a wonderful technology. You haven't read my book?
I haven't, no.
Okay, so I did more research in that book than anyone.
The Bitcoin one?
Yeah, into who Satoshi is. I was determined to, work it out. And I spent ages, I slaved over every word Satoshi ever wrote. And was comparing his, and I sort of worked backwards, and I figured out there was only 3 or 4 people in the world who could possibly have invented Bitcoin, because you need this huge knowledge at the intersection of computer programming, cypherpunk, ability with spreadsheets,
economics,
law, economics, monetary history. Satoshi was also, he never gets the credit for this, a PR genius. In all the 70,000 words he wrote on the internet, there was one spelling mistake, one. And the word was ideological. Bizarrely, he spelt it I-D-E-A, ideological, rather than ideological. In perfect grammar. It was before the days where he could put it through AI to make sure it was, and all the stuff, the two spaces after a full stop, all these little quirks. And so I had a long list of people that it could be, which were people on the cypherpunks mailing list. And I whittled it down. And in the end, I came to the conclusion that it was Nick Szabo. And I was like the guy who said it was Nick Szabo. And I thought it was, and I don't think it is now. He was just the most likely person. And I suffered from prosecutors' bias in that. So I can't remember where I was going with all of that. But so, and by the way, I think Satoshi's probably dead. And that explains the disappearance. But so I put this, there was a point to me telling that story.
You started off with your book.
Yeah.
And you went through the process of, you were obsessed with identifying who Satoshi Nakamoto was.
I wanted the scoop.
And so that's what you wanted. Okay.
Yeah.
I was wondering why.
I was thinking like a stupid
it's a very
journalist,
natural thing to be curious about who Satoshi was.
I know where I was. Yeah. So I was at a dinner with, I was at a dinner with, at Michael Saylor's house during the Miami conference 2 or 3 years ago. And I sat next to some dude at the dinner, and this always comes up, late night conversations. Who do you think Satoshi was? And I've done all this work on it. And this guy next to me said, well, have you considered that it might be, that he might have been an alien?
He might be what?
An alien.
Okay.
And he, or from God, and he just put Bitcoin there so that humankind can save itself. And I was like, what? And then it was like the one thing, of course, I hadn't considered. And then I began to process it. And it was like, that's one explanation that I'd never considered, but it's actually not that unlike, I mean, he was kind of half joking when I say it, and I'm kind of half joking now, but there's a little bit of me that actually means it, that some higher power put it here so that humanity could save itself. Because I think it's that extraordinary what Bitcoin has the potential to do. And then you go, okay, let's say you think that for a moment. Well, then you're back in the religion, the belief system. And so, either way, he was a genius. And I like to say by buying a Bitcoin, you are exploiting or benefiting from the cumulative IQ of everybody that has been involved in the Bitcoin movement at some point, from the early cypherpunks right through to Satoshi himself, and then all the, the huge open source thing that has developed it. By buying your nth of a Bitcoin, you are getting your nth of all that cumulative IQ. I think that's quite a persuasive way to look at it. But in any case, we're back to this belief system thing, and so, yeah, it's that sort of religious power to it. Yeah.
You seem to have already identified a problem with the existing system of monetary debasement.
Oh, yeah.
How did you get to that point?
Gold.
Okay, but why were you looking for gold?
No.
So what made you curious about solving, or how did you identify that problem, and what made you curious about following through?
2006, my dad had written this musical, and I was trying to, and it was the most brilliant thing I've ever seen, and we needed £5 million to bring this musical into the West End. And I was trying to figure out, how do we raise £5 million? And we had a tiny bit of money between us. And so I was like, well, we can start. I'll try and invest the money and see how it goes. And so I started reading about investments about then. Up until that point, I was just a comedian and a voiceover artist. And as I was reading late at night, I kept discovering that, we were in this commodities bull market, growth of China, but particularly gold. And, people say gold is undervalued. At the time, gold was $300, $400, $500 maybe. And I was like, so I started reading about gold, and everyone's going, hey, the gold price is going to go to $5,000. You're going to make 10 times your money. And I was like, well, if that happens, we could kind of be in the game here. And then once you start reading about gold, you quickly start reading about how money works, fiat money. And suddenly I understood how house prices cost so much money. I could never understand why houses were so expensive.
I had that same problem, actually. Yeah. I had saved up enough money for a deposit, and I'm looking around and I'm like, okay, surely housing is peaking any time now, right? And I was just waiting for an opportunity that typically presents itself through the cycles. The cycles never came in the way that I was expecting it. They were always so short-lived, like 6 months, and we're back and roaring to an all-time highs again. And I never understood, I couldn't understand how that was happening. And on top of that, I had I've got a business degree with a major in finance. So it's like I was miseducated into not being able to identify what the causes were. And so that was my problem. And I was just bewildered for years. I just could not understand it.
They don't teach you. Mm-hmm. And Australian house prices are insane. And it's like Australia's so big. How can the house prices cost so much? But London house prices at the time, 2006, 2007, were just so basically, if you were born after about 1975, 1980, that was it. You were never going to get. And I just could not understand it. And then suddenly it was one of those, everything comes back, gold, sound money, evils of fiat money, 1971, yada, yada, yada.
Cantillon effect. And I'd never even heard of that until I started watching Max and Stacey again.
Yeah, exactly. So all that, so that was why I became such a gold bull and so anti-fiat. And that led to gold, and then it's speculating in gold and making a lot of money and losing a lot of money, and then coming to Bitcoin and making a lot of money and then losing it all, being hacked and then coming back. So it's been a hell of a journey.
So your discovery of gold as an investment thesis was which years were
2005, 6.
Okay. And did you hear about Bitcoin upon launching, at all, or was it 2010, the very first
Bitcoin
time?
obviously launched 2009.
Yeah.
And as I say, December 2010 was when I got that first email about it.
I heard about it really early on, and it's a virtual currency like a video game or something like that. You know, I just didn't think anything. It didn't pique my curiosity because I didn't have a problem that I identified that could be solved by Bitcoin. Even though conceptually at a very high level, I thought, okay, I understand what that is, but I didn't have a defined problem. So that's why I didn't make the leap to, this could be a potential solution to a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I just thought it was I thought it was a great idea, but I thought it was going to be like a junior mining company. It was going to go up and it was going to come down. Well, it did, and then it went up again and up and up and up and up. But I'm coming to the view, I mean, I'm on the sort of the cusp where I like gold and I like Bitcoin. A lot of younger Bitcoiners are dismissive about gold, and a lot of old gold bugs are dismissive about Bitcoin. I think they both have their role to play. And I think when you promote Bitcoin over gold because of its portability, because it's not a physical thing, you're effectively making the argument that digital is better than analog. And in many ways, digital is better than analog. And that's why we use, PDFs rather than books, and word processing rather than handwriting and so on. Digital is great. And it's got more and more since the 70s, and there's a scalability to digital, but there is still a role for physical.
Well, there's a custom around gold, using gold as a store of value that's 5,000 years old. That's not going away. And it's a 22, 23 trillion market cap asset.
Yeah.
It's not going anywhere.
And, for some people, it isn't going anywhere. No. It literally isn't. Like this little bit of gold that I've got around my neck was formed before the solar system. It's that old, billions of years old. And if you think you can't destroy gold, this little bit of gold is older than the solar system. And so this is the closest I will ever come in my life to touching eternity, is to touch this bit of gold. And, hundreds of years from now, digital technology will be replaced by something else that's better than digital technology. The gold will still be there.
So what's your thinking about continuing to invest in gold? And I'm presuming that you have an allocation to gold in your portfolio and Bitcoin. Why are you doing that?
I do have an allocation to gold, but my allocation to gold is quite historical in that it goes all the way back to 2006, 2007. And I just never sold it, and I'm glad I didn't. And I've increased it, every now and then I'll see a gold coin or something and I'll buy a little bit more. But some of my readers are older. Like if I was getting my mum, my mum is, she's in her 80s. It just, to do all the technical stuff that you have to do with Bitcoin is just too difficult for her. She could probably go onto Coinbase and buy a little bit on Coinbase and do all of that, but then she'd have to store it with Coinbase, and she wouldn't be able to deal with all the passwords and the two-factor authentication. And then, if you don't take your Bitcoins and store it yourself, you run the exchange risk and something like that. So just for some people, but if I gave her some gold, she could have it, she could wear it, she could hide it, she'd know what to do. So for some people, gold is a better investment than Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin will outperform gold, but it's just too difficult for some people of a certain generation, of a certain mindset. And so that's why I continue to recommend both gold and Bitcoin. And for some, Bitcoin is better. For my kids, Bitcoin is better. For, for my parents, gold is better. And they both have their role. But you just, one is a physical asset and the other is a digital asset. And the use case at the moment for digital is much greater than for physical, but that won't always be the case. Probably it will be in our lifetime, but.
I'm really fascinated about the cultural aspects of the Bitcoin community. And I always ask someone who's been around for much longer than I have, this is my 5th year in the Bitcoin space now, what was it like in the early days when you started engaging with the community?
Well, the community, like I say, I didn't engage enough. But, I've got some, like Roger Ver, I regard as a friend. I know he's a sort of enemy, but I regard him as a friend. John Matonis was like the first head of the Bitcoin Foundation. We're still very good friends. We message each other all the time. We started a company together. Adam Back was sort of pretty OG, although he himself admits he was a little bit
He's coming
late.
after you, so
yeah. But no, he was around. I mean, I wrote about Adam in my book at great length, and funnily enough, we exchanged quite a few messages in the early days. And so Adam, I regard as a friend, and the Bitcoin community on the whole is very supportive. And they like other Bitcoiners to do well, and they're very happy to share. And it's generally speaking, it's a very supportive community. And so, there is this regard that we're all allied, but they'll all take the piss out of me for being a gold bug.
I was just about to ask you, were they adversarial and antagonistic towards you because of your penchant for gold?
No. I mean, there's kids who take the piss out of me on Twitter all the time. They're just like, give it a rest. Just move on, let it go. And there's a guy called Ashley Giles who's always taking the piss of mine. And Stack Collymore.
I haven't seen that handle, but Ashley, we've exchanged messages.
And they're just like, give it up, mate. You're a boomer. But I hope I justify my position, and I think own both. But there is also this thing to the Bitcoin community that I never saw this coming, but at one, you go to a conference, we'll see it tomorrow when Saylor's walking around. He is a rock star. He is a rock star.
So what do you make of that? Because when he first came onto the scene, I was watching the Bitcoin space looking for an entry into a trade, right? That's what Bitcoin was for me. And then he came out with his company and put it on the MicroStrategy balance sheet, as it was known back then. And it was literally breaking the ice, right? It's the first I think it was the first listed company to put Bitcoin on its balance sheet in a meaningful way. And incredible reaction. We're all happy about that. And now people are saying, I think they're getting too big. And they're starting to cast aspersions about motivations, potential connections to all sorts of parts of the government, which, I think are not really warranted. And there is a cynical, skeptical vein within the culture as well. So I'm interested in what you think about that, because his popularity is unrivaled, I think, in this space right now. He's quite literally the main character in Bitcoin. What do you make of that?
Well, a guy called Mo Adam, me, and John Matonis started a company called Cypherpunk Holdings back in 2018, 2019. And I like to think we were the first company to put Bitcoin on.
Were you listed though? Was that
yes?
It was publicly listed
in Canada.
I beg your pardon.
But Michael Saylor did it and took it to another level that we just did not envisage. And he became the most articulate, charismatic spokesman. That guy's done more for Bitcoin than probably anyone bar Satoshi himself.
I'm so glad you said that, because I had Eric Semler in yesterday. He was kind enough to come and visit us.
Yeah.
And I said, I can't think of anything more he could have done, or in any better way, for someone to essentially put their 30-year legacy with a corporation on the line and go all in on Bitcoin.
Yeah.
He's evangelized, orange-pilled Wall Street, corporate America, and the world, really. I'm sure he's very active behind the scenes in the political scene as well, but he tries not to be political in the public domain. He's been
I met RFK at his house.
Oh, okay.
So
okay.
he's
he's I just can't think of a better person from the corporate world to have done what he's done. I think we're quite happy. We're quite lucky to have had him, to be honest.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. He has been brilliant. And the real cheerleaders, you want to know someone who's the proper champion, it's in the depths of a bear market. Because that is when you question yourself, you question your first principle. Like, it's easy to go to cheer Bitcoin when it's going up. Everyone comes out of the woodwork and starts cheering it. But in a bear market, and it's people like Dan Held, people like that, McCormack, when they come out at the depths of a bear market and go, look, it's the bear market that makes you. And Saylor has done that. And he's, so for me, he is a total hero. But that's why he's a rock star. And he's this whole thing of money is energy. As far as I know, that's come from him. And it's just such a brilliant...
Bitcoin is digital energy.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
But money is energy, it's stored energy. But anyway, and it was him on... I first heard that with him talking on Breedlove's podcast way back when. And I was like, who is this guy? He's great. And, he's just brilliant. And now he's sort of given rise to this Bitcoin treasury thing, which in the case of the UK has gone a little bit nuts. There's a company I'm looking at called Coincilium that's got 2-3 million quid's worth of Bitcoin and its market cap's 130 million. And you're like, whoa.
What's going on there? Yeah.
But that's because of the stupid FCA, Financial Conduct Authority, rulings that ordinary investors can't buy Bitcoin through their SIPs and their ISAs and their pensions and so on. And so it's just created this situation of pent-up demand. So that explains that. But in terms of going back to what we were saying about, Saylor being a rock star, and, Bitcoin's biggest champions are now rock stars. And it's funny because, you expect rock stars to be, Saylor's obviously a well-dressed, well-presented man, but, some of the Bitcoin rock stars are very geeky, slightly autistic, fat guys in front of their computer, whatever. And not necessarily fat, but you know what I mean.
I know what you're talking about, yeah.
Yeah, and they don't look like Ozzy Osbourne in his prime or Adam Ant in his prime or whoever the rock star, I don't know, Taylor Swift or whoever it is. I'm revealing my age.
Slovenly 40-year-old virgins. That's the image that you're projecting.
Exactly. And so, but they are big stars in the little bubble world that is Bitcoin. And it's funny, Bitcoin is the solution. You fix money, you fix the world. You really do. That is my fundamental view and has been for a long time. I've made that argument time and time again. I also think you design a society by the way you tax it, which is the argument.
We'll talk about that.
My other book, Daylight Robbery. But it's still a tiny, like, I don't know what percentage of people in the UK, for example, have exposure to Bitcoin, but I would wager it's well below 5%.
Oh,
the majority of people have heard of it and they talk about it. Oh, yeah, I heard about that 10 years ago. I should have got in there. I never did. It's too late now. No, it isn't. And it's still, in the context of the grander thing, a tiny bubble. And the bigger it gets and the more that fiat money declines, the more that Bitcoin is going to get blamed for the decline in fiat. But actually the two currents are happening at the same time. They're both going into the same ocean. They're debasing fiat. The more they debase fiat, the stronger the argument for Bitcoin becomes, and the stronger the case. So the currents flowing into the same ocean, but it's still a tiny thing in the greater context of the world.
I want to elaborate on that in a second, but before we move off this Saylor point, what do you think is motivating this periodic wave of criticism about him? Do you think it's tall poppy syndrome, or is it the fact that, someone who's the chairman, founder, CEO, well, he's not a CEO anymore, of a publicly listed company in the United States, has a little bit of a divergence in how he manages a Bitcoin stake than an individual?
Where is this criticism of him coming from?
Just the timeline, the general timeline.
Okay, so I haven't seen it. So I'm going to explain it without knowing about it, but I'll explain it.
Well, I'll tell you what the subject matters are.
Is it coming from within Bitcoin?
Yes. So that's what I'm talking about. So in the first instance, the most recent example was the fact that he said, we think it's an attack or risk vector if we acknowledge and expose our Bitcoin public addresses publicly. A lot of people disagree with that, and they think it's a virtue because of the verify, don't trust aphorism, right? The other thing is he's owning too much. Third thing is he's becoming too influential on the culture, which I think all three are quite absurd. Anyway, I'll leave it open to you.
I can see why people think Strategy owns too much, and I can see why people think he's becoming too, I don't agree with it, but I can see why they think why he's becoming too influential. Mm-hmm. Because, I think, it's got, is it 500,000 coins now? 600,000 coins, something like that. Yeah. And eventually at this rate, he's going to have more than Satoshi. And so, at the point at which he decides to sell, he can manipulate the price. So that's why people think, and it's supposed to be a decentralized spread currency, and the more one person owns of it, the less distributed it is. And you want it to be as distributed as possible. So I can see that argument, but it doesn't look to me like Saylor's ever going to sell.
Well, there's nothing you can do about him acquiring more either. I mean, the whole point is we say Bitcoin is for enemies, Bitcoin is decentralized, Bitcoin doesn't care what you think, and the other thing is we go, well, it's going to be the base layer of global capital, or all the central banks are going to own it and whatnot, and sovereign nations. And so, well, okay, let's say that we click our fingers and that happens tomorrow. What does that look like? How much of it does the United States government own? They're going to own at least 5% of it, right? So don't you think that the earliest moving corporate to identify that opportunity is going to own at least 600,000?
I personally think he is a visionary. And you go back and listen to him talking about Apple and Google in 2012.
That's a phenomenal video.
Yeah, he is clearly a visionary. And, I think he was already a billionaire before Bitcoin. And I think he's on his way to becoming the richest man in the world. And I think Strategy is on its way to becoming the biggest market cap company in the world. And it's because of his vision. And it's because of Bitcoin. So, there's no regulator from on high that's come and says there's only so much Bitcoin you're allowed to buy. Nobody can determine that. It's a totally free market. You can buy as much as you can afford to buy. And what Saylor's doing is finding ways to create fiat and using it to buy Bitcoin. And he's exposing the flaws of corporate finance and of the US dollar more generally by doing what he's doing. So fair play to him. And he's also taking an enormous risk because it could all go tits up. And then imagine the depression that man would go into if it all goes tits up. I don't think it will. But he's defending his investment by being such an articulate spokesman about the place. So I can see why those guys go, he's owning too much. But it's a free market. So it's up to him how much he buys. And he's got where he is in the Bitcoin community by being so articulate about it. And I don't believe the Bitcoin price would be where it is without his championing it.
Or the level of adoption. It's interesting, I've hosted 2 other guests recently since I've been in Prague, and both of them have had something critical to say from different angles. The first one was about the public addresses acknowledging where they are, proof of reserves, and the other one...
just people bullying him.
You think so?
Yeah, I mean, if he doesn't want to say what the addresses are, he doesn't have to. It's his business. And I just think everyone bullies everyone else on the internet, and that's just people trying to bully him.
And the other one was perhaps alluding to something a little bit more surreptitious, and that we're not quite on the same mission. Michael is not quite on the same mission as sovereign individuals in the space.
When Bitcoin first came out, it appealed to different people for different reasons.
In different ways, yeah.
And some people liked it because it was a means by which you could finally buy weed on the dark net. And it suddenly improved the drugs market beyond all recognition because the simple review system meant that the quality of drugs being bought and sold, you'd no longer had to go and get drugs from some skanky guy on the street corner that had been mixed down, So, but in any case, for some people, it was a means to buy drugs. For some people, it was a means to avoid tax. For some people, it was a speculative vehicle. For some people, it was a fantastic new breakthrough technology. If you were a computer coder, you were like, oh, wow, this is brilliant. For other people, it was an entrepreneurial opportunity to set up a company. For somebody else, for the libertarian, it was like a brilliant new weapon of the individual against the state. So it was just different things for different people. And for some people, it was just number go up, speculative, brilliant, I'm going to be rich. And often it was lots of those things. It was a tool against the state, and it was a means to get rich, and it was a means to buy weed, whatever. But it's different things to different people. And just because for one set of people, it's a means by which we can all become sovereign individuals and repair the damages of fiat money, and I happen to think Saylor thinks that, but it's also a means for Michael Saylor to, he's probably sat there for for 20 years with his company strategy going, what are we going to do with this company? You know, it's a okay software company that does this and that service, but I've been unable to grow it for 20 years. I've become extremely rich by speculating in Apple and Google and yada, yada. But, you know, he's probably sat there for 20 years and he's clearly a genius going, what am I going to do? And then suddenly this opportunity has come around for him to transform his own life and transform the fortunes of his company. And, you know, good luck to him. And so just because his goal isn't the same as your goal doesn't mean you're not necessarily allies, if that makes sense.
I think you've explained that particularly well. And I think you're one of the few people who is, you know, quite uniquely placed to be able to make that commentary from a cultural and social point of view with respect to Bitcoin, because you've seen the journey from quite early on. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I suspect, and I face this because my account gained prominence quite quickly. I don't know if you were sort of on Twitter around the time when I started my account, but it went from basically nothing.
During COVID.
Yeah.
And I was one of your new followers. And it was brilliant.
Yeah,
you were doing brilliant stuff. I was actually messaging you going, put my book in your thing.
You messaged me?
Yeah, I was going, you got to mention my book because you did stuff about books at one point.
Oh, bloody hell. Yeah. So like, and there's a bit of gatekeeping and perhaps a little bit of resentment that they're losing the monopoly on the cultural narrative, right? And so other people are coming in. And as the adoption of Bitcoin becomes more and more mainstream, you're getting different types of people. So like, I'm not really an ideological person. I'm certainly not a libertarian. I don't really have a political ideology. And I'd love to. That's why I invited you, so we can have those discussions. But I pick and choose, depending on different problems that we're solving, on what kind of ideologies is best suited for solving that problem. And so I probably represent the beginning of the mainstream, and perhaps some people resented the fact that I was behind the account that was, you know, gaining so much prominence. I'm
surprised to hear that, because I thought you were much more of a, you know,
a libertarian,
maximalist.
I think people assume that.
Yeah.
I'm not a maximalist. I'm a Bitcoin only person. So like, you know, everything else is garbage in this space except for Bitcoin. I'm quite adamant about that. But I'm not a maximalist in the sense that, you know, Pete Rizzo from I think formerly a Bitcoin magazine, I think he wrote a pretty good list of the principles of maximalism. And essentially they all derive from the conviction that Bitcoin is going to fulfill its full potential and take over the world, right? I'm not convinced that is absolutely going to happen. I think there's a very high chance of that going to happen. And for that reason, I think some of my beliefs, according to those principles, are tempered. But I think there's a high chance of that happening eventually. I just don't know what the path for that is in a timeline. And so because of that, I don't call myself a maximalist. And in addition to that, I think some of the sort of antagonizing that happens amongst Bitcoin maxis is also something that makes me not want to call myself a maximalist as well. Because I don't want to engage in battles online with people. I think
hyper-Bitcoinization is coming. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I might write in my copy, it is inevitable. But nothing is inevitable, because you just don't know what's around the corner. Mm-hmm. Somebody could have invented whatever it is, the quantum computing thing that destroys the network, or something. There could be something that destabilizes it, or suddenly there's less chance of this, but suddenly governments decide to, you know, stop running deficits and pay off their debt, and we get sound money again. Or, you know, they go back to a gold standard of some kind and it works. Again, no gold standard has worked because it's a fiat system built on top of gold. But here's just coming back to this thing with Saylor, and we talked about it, we touched on it earlier, and it applies to Saylor and it applies to Bitcoin. As Bitcoin grows and it becomes more successful, and as fiat declines, do you remember I said they will blame Bitcoin? But in a funny kind of way, they caused Bitcoin. They can't blame, you know, Bitcoin didn't end fiat. Fiat ended itself, and fiat gave birth to Bitcoin. You know, Chancellor on brink of second bailout for the banks and all of that. The bigger you get, the more popular you become and the more supporters you have, but also the more detractors you find as well. And so the bigger Saylor gets and the bigger his pronouncements get, he's going to encounter more resistance, more enemy. The biggest celebrities in the world have more enemies than anyone, but they also have more champions than anyone. So that's kind of what's happening to Saylor and what's happened to Bitcoin. Just the bigger he gets, the more enemies he's bound to have. But so I've got a mate in the UK who I think is extremely clever. He's a very, very good newsletter writer. And he's been a very, very good newsletter writer for a long time. And he is always, he's old school English, so he's always very understated. And in a funny kind of way, that old school English understatement is exactly the wrong model for the internet, where you want to be as sensationalist as possible. So despite being a brilliant newsletter writer and a brilliant fund manager, he's never quite built up the following that I think he deserves. And I read his stuff assiduously because I think it's great. And when Saylor came along and made all the arguments he made, my friend just hated it. And I'm like, you're on the same team. What's your problem? And so my friend I think his dislike of Saylor was because of the fact that Saylor was so articulate, making the same arguments that my friend had made. My friend is completely ignored by the internet. Saylor becomes a huge star. So I think a lot of the antipathy towards Saylor comes from the fact that he is so brilliantly articulate and also a brilliant promoter of whatever he says. There are other people who feel that what they say deserves more recognition, and they're just not getting it. And Saylor is. And so that, they've got 10,000 followers on Twitter rather than X million or whatever Saylor has. And so it's the old school celebrity ego.
Cultural gatekeeping is what I call it.
Maybe, but it's like an actor going, why has Mel Gibson got that part? Or why has Tom Cruise got that part? I'm just as good an actor as Tom Cruise or Mel Gibson. He gets all the parts. It's not fair. It's that. And so it's envy, jealousy, resentment. So I think a lot of that, and particularly maybe guys early on who were big, because I say it's very show businessy, Bitcoin. And I describe the guys, as rock stars. But the big, what's Safedine is a rock star. And, he was just a geeky professor writing about money, and suddenly he's a rock star. Good for him. And I sit there going, well, has Safedine's book done better than my book? Well, he promoted it better and he went to the conferences and then my book's better. Fuck you. He got it. He came out at the right time, whatever. Yeah. He did the hard yards. And do you know what? Life isn't fair and over rewards some people and it under rewards other people. Tough shit. I just think a lot of that is, and it's ego. And I think a lot of antipathy that Saylor is getting is probably literally because of that. Because he's saying the same things they've been saying, he's just saying it better or getting more acclaim for saying it or being the originator of it. And it's that simple, ego.
You mentioned earlier on that when hyper-Bitcoinization happens and fiat takes a precipitous fall, that Bitcoin will be blamed for causing the fall instead of its success being a reflection of the profligacy of the government spending, traditional banking, all the rest of that. Do you think gold might provide some kind of an umbrella shield to that because it's significant? At the moment, it's an order of magnitude larger in market cap than Bitcoin.
Yes, I do, actually. I hadn't thought about that before, but as soon as you say it. So quite an interesting development this week. I don't know when you're actually putting the podcast, but this week it's come out that gold is now the second largest holding by central banks around the world. It's overtaken the euro. And so 20% of central bank holdings around the world are gold. And just 10 years ago, it was 10%. So they've doubled. And it's partly because the gold price has gone up.
Any particular central banks?
China. And all the banks, it is partly because central banks have been buying. But like Poland's central bank has been buying, Thailand, but where the central buying is particularly apparent is all countries along the Silk Road, which in itself, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And I've done a lot of research onto this, and there's a guy called Jan Neuenhaus who's like the king. If you look at, like China does not export any of the gold. that it's the biggest importer in the world, and it's the biggest producer in the world, and it's also, it can only export jewelry. It can't export bullion, but it's a net importer by the time you look at its jewelry exports. So if you look at all the gold that China has mined since the turn of the century, and you look at all the gold that it's imported, and you can't tell all of it because some stuff that goes in via Switzerland, London, Dubai is private, but you get a rough idea by looking at what goes through the Shanghai Gold Exchange, even though what the People's Bank of China buys, it keeps private. But it's easy to see that more than 30,000 tons of gold have made their way to China this century. Just park that figure, 30,000 tons. Now, to give you some context, America is the largest holder of gold in the world, and it has 8,000 tons. Okay? But we don't know that it has it because it hasn't been audited in the last 60 or 70 years. But let's just assume that it has the gold. Trump was supposed to audit it, but it hasn't happened. But let's just assume that America has the 8,000 tons that it says it does. 30,000 tons of gold has made their way to China. Now, if you just randomly say, okay, 50% of that, it's more than 30,000 tons, but we know of 30,000 tons. And if you go, okay, half that gold is state-owned. Okay, bear in mind that most Chinese mining is state-owned, for example. Okay, that means China has at least 15,000 tons state-owned. That's almost twice as much gold as America. But China says it has 2,000 and something tons. So it says it has about 25% of what America has. But really, it's probably got double.
What is the strategic advantage to understating your gold reserves?
Because if China turns around and goes, we got twice as much gold as you, it's tantamount to an attack on the US dollar. And the dollar price will tank. China's got $3 trillion. It wants to preserve the value of those. It's a very, very aggressive statement. And so the way that China has operated is we must not shine too brightly, to use the words of Chairman Mao. We must not shine too brightly. So it's just quietly accumulating more and more gold and de-dollarizing. We know that Russia has de-dollarized itself, Iran, but these are all trading partners of Russia. And, these countries along in the Shanghai Cooperation, 40% of the world's land mass, 30% of the world's population, they don't want to be beholden to the US. If they do something wrong, they don't want to be shut out of SWIFT like Russia was.
Well, we've already seen that happen, and they have learned the lessons of that because Russia, China, maybe Pakistan, India, Iran have all been experimenting with an alternative. So they've
all been accumulating gold.
Yeah, building their own kind of systems and then integrating them and testing payments over the last 18 months. My understanding is at least Russia and China have tested and validated that their systems work, and they've started the process of ramping up international settlements between the two.
There are all sorts of things going on. Mm-hmm. But they're just being they're not actually even being that quiet about it. They're talking about it, but it's just not getting a lot of news coverage here in the UK. Russia actually sent Iran 4 tons of gold by plane to buy drones. And this was exposed by some hackers about 2 or 3 years ago. This came out. And so, the impracticalities of sending gold by plane is just so stupid. So they need, like before, what would happen is the gold would be in the vaults of the Fed or the vaults in Switzerland or the vaults of the Bank of England, and then just the ownership of the gold would change. And then World War II, they had to ship everything from the bank because they all thought the UK was going to get invaded, so they sent it all to America. And then it never really came back. So they need somewhere to be Switzerland. And the problem with a lot of those countries, they don't entirely trust each other. So that's the problem. Dubai could play that role maybe, or maybe Singapore. And, there's all these, they're looking at ways to solve this problem. But gold is a great store of wealth, but it's not a great payment metal. And, Bitcoin is the answer. But all these countries are accumulating gold. Now, let's say China and America fall out. We've seen, and when countries go to war with each other, the first thing they wage war in is financially. America did it with Russia. World War II, Germany, for example, printed shitloads of fake pounds and spread them throughout Europe in order to destabilize the pound. The rest of the world shut Germany out of the financial system. And so Germany was playing clever with its gold through Switzerland to try and buy essential goods. But financial warfare is part of warfare. And if China ever needs to go to war with America, it just turns around and goes, actually, we got twice as much gold as you. And suddenly the dollar is toast. And so, that then gold will get the blame rather than Bitcoin in that kind of situation. And so that answers your question. But Bitcoin is for sure is going to have a role to play in all of this. But I see nations at the national level, for the time being, embracing the gold option rather than the Bitcoin option. And there are two reasons for that. Firstly, they already own loads of gold. Most people around the world have an intuitive understanding that gold has value and that gold was once money. So if there's people that banks go again, gold is money again, and we have to revalue it up 10 times because we've printed all this money, whatever. But if they were to base a monetary system on gold again, it wouldn't be beyond international ken. And if China, for example, wants the yuan to be the global reserve currency, well, there has never been a global reserve currency that didn't start out backed by gold. And you talk to Chinese people and they go, ones who know what they're talking about, and they go, well, it's a matter of pride for China. China's position in the world order is rightfully at the top. We've been top in the past and we're going to be top again. And part of that is the international reserve currency. Well, if it wants to get rid of the dollar, it just has to state its gold holdings and the dollar's toast. It's that black and white. So gold is going to have a huge role to play in things. Now, why will countries embrace gold before they embrace Bitcoin? Not all. Some will embrace Bitcoin. But like I say, because generally, if you had to present it to your people, gold has people understand gold better than they understand Bitcoin. It's also generational. Most people in positions of power at central banks are over the age of 50 and, they're boomers and they understand gold better than they understand Bitcoin. In 20 years' time, Bitcoin has a better chance because the people who are now 30 and 40 will be in positions of power in the banks. And so they'll go, okay, actually Bitcoin. Now, here's the ironic thing. Bitcoin is what could actually save the US. Because let's just say that the US gold isn't there and they spent a large portion of it propping up the London gold pool in the 1960s, which is what happened. And that's one of the reasons. The great joke is the head of security goes to the American president, Mr. President, there's no gold in Fort Knox. And the president says, what do you mean there's no gold in Fort Knox? And the head of security goes, there's no gold in Fort Knox. And the president says, double the guard. So that's kind of what's going on now. And I'm sure that's why this audit hasn't happened. But even if the gold is there, it's not of what they would call good delivery quality. It's what they call, it's melted down coins from the confiscation in the 1930s. And the coins were only 90% pure. So it's not good. It all would need refining and resmelting and all that. They should do that as a matter of course anyway, but they don't. So, but if the gold isn't there, America can turn around and go, yeah, but we got all these Bitcoins and Bitcoin is the future. And we got the strategic Bitcoin reserve and we got all the thing. And we're backing the US dollar with Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is better than gold because of all the reasons we know. And suddenly America, I believe China's probably got shed loads of Bitcoin because it used to be the mining capital and so on. But they're keeping quiet about that. But suddenly America becomes the world's, would it be the world's largest Bitcoin holder? One of them with all the Bitcoins it has. I know the UK is third. So suddenly, if the gold isn't there, at least America has something tangible to back it with, i.e. Bitcoin. So that's how I see Bitcoin as potentially saving America.
I spoke to Jeff Park from Bitwise. He's their head of alpha strategies there. And he said the United States can't establish a strategic Bitcoin reserve without meaningful discussions with its creditor partners and allies, because it will undermine the US dollar's position.
Maybe. I get that. And what's interesting at the moment is the US dollar, because Bitcoin, like wonderful store of value And it's also a wonderful medium of exchange because you can send 1 sat, which would be, 1/20th of 1p, something like that. I sent a sat payment to Joe Nakamoto yesterday just to prove that I could do it. 1 sat. And
well, you can do that. People are doing that on Nostr, right? They're like zapping people with.
Yeah. And I've done it before. And I just think implications of being able to make a micro payment like that are enormous. And of course, you can send billions without anyone's permission as well. So Bitcoin is a fantastic medium of exchange. But people aren't like, if I go to somebody selling something, we accept fiat or accept Bitcoin, I'll pay you in fiat because I'd rather keep my Bitcoins. So sometimes, if I'm paying, like I did a job in Argentina earlier in the year, and it was just easier to pay me in Bitcoin because, cross-border and all of that. But most of the time, people are still using fiat for payments. And, the architecture around fiat payments is very good. Across borders, it's crap, but it's getting better thanks to Revolut and Wise and all that stuff. But so Bitcoin as a medium of exchange is, if you're talking about digital nomads and stuff, a lot of them are sending US dollar stable coins. And we're seeing the gradual tether and all of that, the gradual proliferation of US dollar stable coins. And Bessent seems to, Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, seems to think they're going to have a big role to play in everything. And it's almost like secretly the US dollar is spreading itself, or America is spreading, or it's just happening quite organically because it's America and it's the US dollar. Among online payments, you're just seeing the spread of the US dollar. And it, like all the other, there's no like euro stable. There is a euro stable coin, but it's shit. And the US dollar one is just bigger and better and broader. And the euro is the main competitor. And so you're seeing the spread of the US dollar via the stable coin, which is quite interesting. So that means that America's still going to be able to export its monetary policy and its debasement. So that doesn't change the case for Bitcoin. But, you should store your value in Bitcoin, but make your payments in stable coins. That seems to be the trend that's going on. But your question was like, almost like, can America back its dollar with Bitcoin? Was that kind of where you were going?
Not really, but it was more about, does it undermine the US dollar if they have a strategic Bitcoin reserve?
Because it's an admission, an effective admission that the US dollar is crap.
It could be. I mean, they have a cheese reserve. They have a strategic cheese reserve of $2-3 billion.
I didn't know that.
Every country. Most people didn't know that. When I found out, I think it was about 18 months ago, I found out. I was, this is wild. It can't be right. It's absolutely true. They have a couple of $1 billion worth of cheese.
Every country should have an international cheese reserve.
Yeah, I mean, if it's
cheese reserves are mouldy.
It's something you'd expect the French to do, and then the whole world would laugh at them somehow, but in a crisis, they've got the cheese, right?
And the Swiss cheese reserve is full of holes.
So it's just one of those things where, I think Jeff's point was that if the United States did that in any meaningful scale, it would signal to the rest of the world what it thinks about its US dollar.
I see what you mean.
Because of the nature of what Bitcoin is,
I see what you mean. But I think maybe, but I think he has a good point. But I would also say that, like, the more reserves a country has, like, Norway's, is it the Norwegian krone? Yeah, the Norwegian krone is kind of backed by its oil. Even though it isn't, it kind of is, and by its sovereign wealth fund. So that whatever form, the Kiwi dollar is backed by its sheep.
I'm sure they'd be very happy to hear about themselves characterized like that.
A wool-backed currency.
Yeah.
But whatever America has in reserve at the national level, whether it's gold or Bitcoin or cheese, has to surely add to the strength of the place, ultimately.
That's really interesting. You mentioned Europe, so let's talk about Europe. Well, it's a very confusing place when it comes to Bitcoin and regulation in general. They seem to think that getting things done is regulating things. Like, they seem to take a great pride in introducing regulation as if that in and of itself is an accomplishment, which is just puzzling. I've never really encountered that. And it seems to be accelerating in more and more different venues, right? So like they're limiting cash, they're regulating plastic bottle tops, plastic straws, all sorts of things. It's like they're just on the hunt for things to regulate and rule on. And it's like, on the other hand, the whole continent seems to be in a bit of a malaise. And I don't exclude the United Kingdom from that either. When I arrived in London, it was in 2006, right? So it was before the financial crash. And there was still a bit of upside left in that. It was such a great buzz to the city. It really was. And it was quite an optimistic place to be. It was a place where people came and they felt like at least the foreseeable number of years, it was a place where they could pursue their dreams, their ambitions for their careers. Students were graduating and quite hopeful of getting jobs. I think all of that optimism, it's been at least 10 years that it's been wiped away and hasn't returned. So 2008, people were still hopeful that there'd be some kind of rebound. But there was just this kind of malaise that kept going and a bifurcation of the economy that was really reflected in most of the developed world, the United States, where wealthy people got much wealthier and everybody else, including from the upper middle class to the lower income earners, really saw a degradation in their living standards. And that was also reflected we saw in the luxury market versus the proliferation of the pound shops, for example, the cheaper end of the retail spectrum.
£5 shops now.
Therefore, yeah, it's right. There's nothing of value under £1 anymore, is there? It's like, so we've seen that. But specifically with respect, so my confusion is why aren't they doing anything to generate some level of growth? They seem to feel, I think they've given up on that and they're just focusing on things to regulate as a proxy for an accomplishment, right? But what we're seeing, there is some light with respect to Bitcoin. Whereas the United States, traditional finance was very much waiting for the green light politically at the federal level. We're seeing across Europe a number of very large banks not adopt Bitcoin, but looking to introduce various services from trading, custody, sales. Santander, Deutsche Bank, quite a number of others across the continent. Switzerland, Italy, Spain, maybe Portugal. But the UK seems to be uniquely absent in that. And what's confusing to me is that London in particular has such a long pedigree of being the financial capital of the world. And yet they've dropped the ball on that and the governments, both persuasions, continue to view Bitcoin in an adversarial way. What the hell is going on?
Well, there's so many things in what you just said that I want to pick up on.
Do you disagree on anything that I've said, by the way?
No, not a word. Not a word. And I agree, 2006-07, it felt like there was much more opportunity in London. It was a buzzing city. And, the city was one of the global financial capitals. And in terms of the city as London as a financial centre, we regulated ourselves out of existence after the financial crisis. Loads of regulations came in and basically we have been dead ever since.
Brexit accelerated that too, it should be said.
Well, but no, the London is dead as a financial centre. It began with the regulations that followed 2008. Then you come to Brexit 2016, and the most given reason for voting for Brexit was sovereignty.
Okay.
And what we did after Brexit was, repeated, 75% of the Tory government that was administering Brexit voted Remain. They didn't understand it, they didn't like it. But what we did at the regulatory level was we went, okay, what we'll do while we're devising our new regulations, we'll just import all the existing regulations from Europe and use those. And then that's why every time you go on a computer, you have to do accept cookies, for example, all that stupid shit. And we'll just accept those and then we'll write our own.
So what was the point?
Exactly. And of course, we never wrote our own, and regulations are easy to impose and hard to get rid of. And so we just brought in all the European regulations that we were trying to free ourselves of. So it's just stupid. Now, if you actually look at growth in Western Europe, UK and Western Europe, since 2016, the UK has actually outperformed Western Europe, and Germany and France have all been terrible. So in that sense, you could say that Brexit was a good thing. And, Keir Starmer and Trump have just signed a deal which we wouldn't have been able to sign if we'd been part of the EU. So in that sense, you would say Brexit. I happen to have voted for Brexit, but I also recognise that we have made an absolute mess of it and foregone most of the opportunity that it presented. But across UK and the EU, there is this mentality, this technocratic mentality, that we know best, and everything they U-turn on, sound bites, spin-driven. Yeah, we champion free markets. Yeah, we champion green energy. Yeah, we champion this. They champion technocracy. And Starmer's a technocrat. And so, why are there no unicorn tech companies coming out of Europe and the UK? Why are they all in America? Because you cannot build it. It's not possible within the regulatory frameworks we have, and our financial markets are stuff that we can't raise capital at the right valuations, and it just all gravitates to America because it's a much bigger economy and there's much more freedom to operate. There's much more capital there, and it's a virtuous circle, and we're in a negative circle. And, relative to the rest of the world, Western Europe is in a massive decline. Even relative to Eastern Europe, we talked about at the beginning of this podcast how wonderful Prague is. Well, I'm just looking at a city that's on the up in Prague, and I compare it to London, Paris, Frankfurt. These are all cities that are on a very different trajectory. And it is because everywhere you look, there is some regulation. And then they go, yeah, but we're going to give this business money and we're going to subsidize it. Well, subsidy is just a form of a technocrat deciding where capital should go rather than the natural market flows of capital. It distorts capital flows and it results in misallocation of capital and wasted capital as a result. And, there are insane amounts of money being spent on green energy, windmills and so on, which is hypocritical, for example, in the case of windmills, because the amount of fossil fuel that is burnt to produce the materials with which they're built means they're uneconomic anyway, and then they don't decompose, and then they destroy the landscape or the seascape, and then they don't work when it's not windy, and then when it's too windy they produce too much energy and they can't use the energy. I mean, it's just insane. And I'm not saying there isn't a role for these things, there is, but the market needs to decide it. And we've gone green in the UK and we now have the highest electricity prices in the world. And then people wonder why the economy isn't growing. Well, it needs cheap energy to grow. We're back to the Saylor energy thing. And America has much cheaper gas. And as we transition from burning fossil fuels to nuclear and other forms of clean energy, gas is the transition energy, the transition fuel. Thank you. And yet, in the UK, we have more than enough natural gas to supply our own natural gas and become a net exporter. A lot of it comes from the North Sea. They've banned exploration and development of the North Sea. So we're buying our natural gas from Norway, which is getting it from the same place. Plus there's or we're getting it from America, which is fracking. We've banned fracking in the UK, so there's no fracking in the UK. We're getting it from America, which is getting it by fracking. Plus there's the environmental cost of transporting it. It's just nuts. And this kind of stupidity with all these stupid consequences and hypocrisies and all the rest of it, you can find it at every level of, it's not just energy, it's all throughout the economy, but energy is the most important because that's the fundamental building block of an economy. An economy will not grow unless it consumes more energy. And we have this mentality that consuming energy is bad and therefore we need to consume less energy. So we're going to regulate energy until we consume less energy, and then we're consuming less energy, and now we can't understand why there's no growth. It's just stupid. But they think they're helping. And there's this mentality of we know better than you, we know better than the market, we're going to plan this, and it does not work. It's just a form of control. And everywhere there's control, you don't have freedom. And if an economy is to grow, the fundamental thing is you need free thought, free markets, free everything.
Very well said. My thoughts drift to the interplay between banks and government. we don't seem to be...
I didn't even start on why they're not using Bitcoin.
We're not even seeing any UK banks doing what some of the European banks are doing. And so the question in my mind is, this is a country, the United Kingdom, and London in particular, is a place that has always innovated and led financial innovation in the world. And so why are we such laggards? I don't understand it.
Listen, Satoshi Nakamoto, Japanese name, he wrote in British English. The Genesis block, there was a newspaper cutting, not from the New York Times, but from the English Times. There is a very good chance that Satoshi Nakamoto was English or British,
Or European with an affinity for British culture.
But he wrote in British English. Mm-hmm. And if you look at early Bitcoin, the early Bitcoin conference, the first book about Bitcoin was written by a UK author. You're talking to him. The early Bitcoin conferences were in the UK. The UK was mentioned in the Genesis block. If you look at UK confiscations as a result of the Silk Road and all of that, we are the third largest holder in the world. I think we've got 60,000 Bitcoins or something. The only America, and I don't know which of the other country owns more than us. We were right there in the middle of it. And then the FCA, because of speculation in crypto, the FCA is the Financial Conduct Authority, our regulator, decided that it didn't like Bitcoin and it didn't like crypto. And it made it impossible to send money to crypto exchanges from a bank. So it just made it ludicrously difficult for UK investors to buy Bitcoin. And it's still the case now. Even I can't buy, as a UK investor, one of the Bitcoin ETFs that's listed in America. Like, how ridiculous is that? And the ETFs have been there 9 months or something?
No, more than that. It's January of last year.
Okay.
18 months.
So, and I still can't buy them in my UK brokerage account. And if I had a brokerage account in America, but it's got me down as an Englishman, it goes, sorry, you can't buy this ETF. And that is the Financial Conduct Authority. And when it began this, Bitcoin was at $5,000. And Bitcoin's now $105,000. So that is $100,000 of gain that the UK investor has been protected from.
20x, 20 times.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But it's not just that. It's like we were, he was English. Let's just say he might not have been British, but there was something very British about Satoshi. We were right there at the vanguard of it and gifted. And we have just lost the march and we are now total laggards. And it's all because of regulation has made it so difficult, most people don't bother. And so that is and I talked about the regulation about energy, which is another, crypto is one of the most, and I use the word crypto rather than Bitcoin deliberately, it's one of the most innovative technologies there is in the world. And there's so much experimentation and invention and innovation happening. A lot of it is scams. It always is the thing. But, a lot of it is brilliant technological stuff that is going on. And the UK, we've got a long history with computer science. Alan Turing and others, some of our computer scientists were pretty good. Isaac Newton designed the entire gold standard on which the world economy was built for 200 years. We've got a long history with money as well. We invented, the Bank of England was one of the world's first central bank. We've got a long history, as you say, and crypto is right at the vanguard of new financial technology. And we should be the world leaders. We should be punching above our weight. And we are not even making it into the ring.
Should be dominating.
Yeah.
Like, there is no dominant place in the world for Bitcoin right now with such a lead that it's unassailable. So it's not too late.
No.
The thing is, I don't see
any
kind of enthusiasm or initiative to even enter into the game.
It's not going to happen in the UK because the dude who is in charge of the FCA, he's like a shoo-in to be the next governor of the Bank of England. And that comes in 2028, 2.5 years from now. He wants that gig. And he's going to do everything he can to assure he gets that gig. And so that personal career ambition will inform every decision he makes between now and 2028. And he's going to do nothing to upset the apple cart. And the fact that crypto is not illegal, but one step up.
It's not sanctioned. It's not approved.
If he sanctions it and suddenly we embrace crypto and everyone loses a load of money, then he's going to end up with egg in his face, and he risks that position. He risks his career. So he's not going to do it. And so we're stuck where we are.
What's the best case scenario? Is it that something like the United States is putting together a digital asset framework, a legal framework? I think Europe is doing something similar. It's going through various draft motions. Is it that
Euro's going CBDCs?
Yeah, I know.
But it's going to be at the institutional level. I don't think it can roll out at the personal level because there isn't the financial infrastructure.
I just mean that their digital asset framework will probably allow individuals to engage with Bitcoin. Not that it's a pro-Bitcoin framework like the American one is looking like shaping up to be, right? Whereas Europe, their banks are already lining up to offer. And they're already launching such services. I've posted about it on my timeline, right? And some of the biggest banks as well, which is why I say like...
And are they genuinely doing it, or is it just jawboning?
No. So it's typically a subsidiary of a very large bank. I can look it up exactly, but the names that are in my mind are Deutsche Bank and Banco Santander, that they have launched Bitcoin buy-sell custody services to their clients. Typically,
you can buy Bitcoin ETFs on the continent.
They had them long before the United States.
I know.
They called them ETPs, though, right?
And ETNs.
And there's a nuance there. It's been explained to me, but I often forget the difference. It's typically through a subsidiary, typically launched for a particular segment of their customers. Sometimes it's institutional, sometimes private wealth clients, and other times it is retail. But they're at least doing something. Like they recognize the opportunity and they're doing something, and there's like a foothold there. So internally they have developed the competency, developed the business case, and then probably work with some suppliers to formulate a solution for a customer segment. And that can then be expanded throughout the subsidiary and then the broader bank, right? The banking groups. There's just nothing happening in the UK. There's nothing I can put my finger on to say such and such is doing this. And there's a trend, a growing momentum within the financial services industry that we're getting more of this. There's nothing. There's just the lights are not on.
No, I mean we've got our Bitcoin treasury companies that
the Smarter Web, for example.
Yeah, Smarter Web and Coincilium and the thing. But I agree. Like we've gone from being leader to laggard. And it's not going to change.
Yeah, and I can't think of a better word than malaise. It's just we're kind of just accepting of
agreed.
defeat.
It's so stupid.
Where is the ambition? And that's what I want to see. I want to see aspiration and ambition. You don't have to do anything for us, but you can get out of the way.
So do you remember George Osborne went and bought Bitcoin in a Bitcoin ATM? George Osborne was a chancellor, and I want to say 2015, something like that.
I don't remember the time,
2014, 2015, and he made a big thing, And then Rishi Sunak did this whole thing, Britcoin, 2 or 3 years ago when he was chancellor. And, he gave it Britcoin. We're going to be at the forefront of crypto. All of this stuff he said, this exciting new industry, we want to be the leader. Well, tell the FCA. Yeah. This is your department and it's regulating against it. And you just look at the UK government and one department's doing this and saying this and another department's doing something completely different. And you just go, well, no wonder nothing works. Because they all undermine and undercut and just do totally different things. And you're like, which is it?
Dominic, you've written a book, Daylight Robbery. Why did you write that? And how did you come to the position of wanting to write this book?
Well, Daylight Robbery is all about the history of taxation and the way we're taxed today and how we're likely to be taxed in the future. And it started as an Edinburgh show. And I've always been a fix money, fix the world guy. But there's a lot of crossover between money and taxation in the Venn diagram. And in fact, obviously inflation is taxation without legislation. It's a form of taxation. And I had thought long and hard about this, and I came to the conclusion that you design a society by the way you tax it. You design how prosperous its people are going to be, or how poor, how free they're going to be or how subordinated. Taxation itself is a measure of freedom. The more you're taxed, the less economic freedom you have. But also concurrently with that, if you have less economic freedom, your other freedoms are limited as well. And I started to look through history and consider great events from history. And I realized that behind almost every great event in history, there is a tax story, usually an untold one. And I used to do a thing with an audience where I challenged them to shout out events from history, and I would tell them the tax story behind, the untold tax story behind that event. And every war, for example, was paid for with some kind of taxation. Debt is often used to pay for war, but debt is a tax on the future. But during every war, taxes go up to pay for the war. Every conquest is about taking control of the tax base, the land, the labor, the produce, the profit. Every revolution is a rising up against some kind of injustice perpetrated by the tax system. You control people by the way you tax system. Even things like the Great Wall of China, we think it was to keep out the hordes. No, it was to send people through little gates so that they could be taxed as they came in and out of China, especially along the Silk Road. Same goes for Hadrian's Wall. Most of the great buildings in the world were built with taxpayer money. Maybe not the pyramids, we don't know, but the great houses of parliament, they were all the great churches built through tithes and so on. Even our surnames we have, because until the 13th century, most people didn't have surnames. You'd just be John or Alan or Archie. But then you would be John, John's son, versus John from the Hill, versus John the Smith, versus John, Cameron, which means like crooked nose, or Kennedy is another one, which means shaggy hair. So your surname was there to distinguish you for the purposes of collecting taxes. And that's why we have surnames. Other great events, assuming man did actually land on the moon, but whether he did or not, it was still paid for with taxpayers' money. Mary and Joseph were in Bethlehem to pay taxes. And that's when Jesus was born. So there's just tax stories behind everything. And once you start to look at history and the world around us today through this prism of taxation, it totally changes the way that you look at the world. And to my knowledge, nobody had written about this, and that's basically why I wrote that book. And so many people that have read it have just said how it opened their eyes and changed the way they view the world. And yeah, it's done very well.
From a political ideological lens, you have a libertarian
very much
ideology. How did you become libertarian?
By investing in gold.
You became one after you invested in gold, or you're libertarian and okay.
I invested in gold to make money, same way a lot of people start off in Bitcoin and then the politics follow. It was after investing in gold that I read about, the devaluation of currency and what fiat money has done to the world, and the growth of government and the manipulation of money, and how gold, sound money, holds governments to account and limits what they're able to do, and how societies thrive best when money is sound and taxes are low and people are free. And, all these things turn me into a libertarian. And so in my view, the less government there is, the better.
In all respects?
Pretty much. When I leave a Bitcoin conference, tend to leave full ANCAP. If I'm hanging around with people in the UK, I'm a sort of minarchist 10% of GDP guy.
What do you think is a fair rate of taxation?
Well, in daylight robbery, I argue for if we can get to 20 or 25%. By the time you factor in inflation, we're at over 50% in the West. And, people think a house is the most expensive thing you ever buy in your life. It isn't. It's your government. And, 50% of everything you earn is taken from you. And if you think of the existence of the medieval serf, he had to give half his working week to his lord, and what he produced in the other half of his working week, he could keep for himself. It's the same now for the ordinary working person. More than, tax freedom day comes in June. And we give, but if you factored in inflation, it would be July.
If you factored in VAT?
Well, that is...
Do you include that?
No, you do include that. But yeah, by the time you pay, there's just so many taxes. It's impossible to find any activity that you do in your life that doesn't involve taxation in some kind. The only one you could say is maybe bodily functions, having a pee, doing a poo, but then things like loo paper is taxed. And in ancient Rome, there used to be urine tax. Portuguese urine was prized above all other urine for some reason. But you would pee, and the pee would all be collected in big urns on the street corners, and they would collect the urine, and they would use it to tan leather, and also for brushing your teeth. How did that happen? But I think it's to do with the ammonia or something. Anyway, but yeah, so just tax proliferates everything you do. And sometimes people go, having sex, that's not taxed. Well, the bed that you do it on is, so it's just everywhere.
Well, we have a bedroom tax, or do we still have a bedroom tax in the UK? We did at one point, didn't we?
Yeah,
recently.
There was a tampon tax, wasn't there? And the Airbnb thing. But in any case, it's just everywhere. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. So, but I argue, I think in the book, I can't even remember now, for 20 or 25% maybe, because I'm trying to give achievable numbers.
So flat rate across the board, everybody? Or
yeah, I would have the historical number is the tithe. You would give a tenth. And the reason it's a tenth is we have 10 fingers and it was an easy number to calculate. And so, but in olden times, ordinary citizens didn't necessarily hold cash in the way that we do now. So you would give a tenth of your produce or a tenth of your labor or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's the historical number, and that's the kind of natural number. And if you look at Britain at the turn of Western Europe at the turn of the 20th century, that was the sort of heyday of Western Europe. We were at 10% back then.
I'm conscious of the time, and I want to be respectful of your commitment to us, because I know you also have some other engagements later on. But where can people find you? You also write a newsletter, Substack. So can you share the details with that?
Thank you very much. My Substack is called The Flying Frisbee. You can find it at theflyingfrisbee.com. Frisbee is spelt with a Y, not double E, because it's my surname. And it's a brilliant Substack, and all your viewers should subscribe to it. And it's free, but there's a paying option if you want to do the paid one. And if you're interested in my comedy, frisbees.news is where you can find all the details there. And follow me there, or follow me on Twitter and at Dominic Frisby. And I look forward to entertaining you and interesting you with my content.
Dominic, thank you so much for coming and joining us for a chat. And are you in London?
Yes.
We've got a studio in London.
Oh, brilliant.
I would love nothing more for you to come in and join us, and we can break down that book, because I will have had the opportunity to read Daylight Robbery and hopefully the Bitcoin one too.
Well, I've got a new one coming out in August, all about gold.
Okay.
The Secret History of Gold, so we can talk about that if you like.
Absolutely. Well, let's do a breakdown of Daylight Robbery, and then we can do a promo of your new book as well. So I'll see you in August.
See you in August.
Thank you, Dominic.
Thank you very much, Archie.
That was fantastic. I really enjoyed that.
Oh, good. Thank you.